Tshelo bani ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
Tshelo bani
ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
So this is how we're going to do things. First up, we're going to have our musical item, just to get everyone to relax, get into the groove of things. It's Fana Mlambo and his band, featuring Nandi Kumalo, Ikawekazi, Ildo Nanja, and Paki Palela. So could you give them a round of applause and welcome them on stage?
Tshelo bani ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
Tshelo bani
ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu. Ma ngilambile ngifuna ukudla. Oh ma ngilambile ngifuna ukudla.
Oma so kulelo komela ge. Oh kula kula chichilame. Oma so kulelo komela ge. Oh kula kula chichilame. Oma so kulelo komela ge. We mabongo nshela kanjani. We mabongo nshela kanjani. Elele.
Uphahlo likhusele lomzimba zelikhusele nomhambi ngoba unyawo alinampumulo usukela kudala izandla zasigezana umuntu ube umuntu ngabantu kwelikamthaniya umthwalo bekhuliso umphakathi yikho nje ubaba athi khula khula tshitshe lami uthi mathi khulile uqoma izinsizwa
uma solo uqoma izinsizwa we mabongo nshela kanjani we mabongo nshela kanjani oh no no
umuntu omnyama ubengumfowethu amhlophe besifika namthwalo kwelikamthaniya besingenamncele izizimbane besingalazi yingakho nje ubaba bethi khula khula wetshitshe lami uthi masikhulile uqome ngakithi.
Oh khula khula tshitshe lami oh masonkomile uqome izinsizwa oh khula khula tshitshe lami oh masonkomile uqome izinsizwa we mabongo nshela kanjani we mabongo nshela kanjani oh no no.
Ngikome ngakithi, ngikome zinsizwa. 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 Ngikome ngakithi, ngikome zinsizwa.
I just wanted to ask everyone tonight, how many of you know, I mean, you know that it's Human Rights Day, but how many of you are exactly 100%, informed about what today really is about? None of the writers are allowed to answer. Sorry, guys. Sorry, what was that? I heard something at the top. Nice. What about Shuffle Day? Yeah? Yes, and what was happening on that day? Okay, people were protesting against pass laws. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, guys. So yeah, that's exactly why we're here tonight. And just remembering that the session tonight that we're about to go into is also entitled Human Rights Day. The writers will be speaking about those human issues that we like to sometimes push apart as or push aside as people. So yeah, I'd like to call upon our writers to take part in this writing session. Award-winning poet and writer Chris Abani, as well as prolific ex-South African activist Ronnie Kasrils. And this section will be facilitated by very well-known Lebo Mashile. So I'd like to call upon everyone to come on stage, please, and give them a round of applause.
Should I make a sandwich? Let's bring one chair. No? Okay, so we're on one table.
Now you jokes about blood.
Yeah, I think I need a sandwich tonight. Let's see. Can we bring that mic? Thank you. Thank you. How's it, everybody? Welcome. I have been bung for tonight for weeks, as well as excited. I've been given the wonderful responsibility of facilitating this discussion between two giants, really.
Why are you talking about my weight today?
I got nothing against big people. Almost. We know this. Chris is my twin in a parallel universe, There's another part of the world, another slice of the world where I am a badass Nigerian, I think it works for me, It's working for you, no? Okay. Chris Abani and Ronnie Kasrils are actually very similar. They're similar chords and threads that run through who they are and what they do. There's a very strong activist thread, a very strong social justice thread. They are incredible men in their worlds and in their own respective worlds and in the world in J. So I won't go into the big long bio because you guys saw that on Monday and you have it in your bags. They are men who have found writing as a tool, as a weapon, as a form of healing, as a way of memorializing their human experience as well as our collective human experience. So today being Sharpeville Day, Human Rights Day, I wanted to kick off the discussion and talk a bit about what Sharpeville means to you. In this book, The Unlikely Secret Agent, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful biography written by Ronnie Kasrils about his wife, Eleanor. You speak in great detail about how Sharpeville was the impetus for you to get involved in the struggle. Can you talk to us about what it meant to you then and what it means to you now?
Sure. I remember that day 52 years ago absolutely vividly, as though it had happened yesterday. I was a budding scriptwriter for a film company in Joburg, age 20. I'm not going to say the exact age, you'll work it out then. So around 20, 52 years ago, very old. I was a rebel at school, nonconformist, and out of school, I was already crossing the colour line and having friends across the colour line.
Which you weren't supposed to do.
Including girlfriends.
Ah, yeah.
And you weren't supposed to do that in those days. But I wasn't an activist. That was social. Mm-hmm. And I felt that I now had worked out how to find myself in apartheid South Africa. Sharpeville hit me with shock force. So I was writing a film script, and someone came in and said, "Have you heard the news? They've killed scores of people at Sharpeville." And I was absolutely shocked to the core. And then I heard aeroplanes. We worked near Alexander Township, and there were spotter planes over all the black townships. Lunch break, I was out and dazed, and I related to the black Labour staff about what had happened. And the whites all clubbed together, and they goaded me, because they regarded me as the strange liberal, and they said, "Ahman, Ronnie, don't worry, you'll end up in the same trench as us.
Yo.
We whites have to sink or swim together."
Wow.
So I decided then and there, not because of what they said, but because of what had happened, that I would actually need to do something. And I went and looked for the ANC, and my life changed totally, and I became a political activist instead of a budding scriptwriter for the film industry. And I never looked back. I've retired from that now. I'm active in all senses. I make a comeback to the film industry these days.
Good for you. I'd like to see you in the film industry, actually.
We're making a sex tape together.
I think you would make a lot of money out of that, keeping up with Chris Abani. You know, you could spin a whole career. Yeah, that would work.
Yeah, I'm
that
just
would
saying.
work. Yeah, that would work. Would you please read something from your book for the audience?
Well, within a couple of years, I was working here in Durban for Lever Brothers, doing film advertising and stuff like that. Met this beautiful Durbanite, Eleanor, and we started going out together, and very soon found ourselves in Umkhonto we Sizwe, because there was no way to change things the peaceful way. I had to go underground with the passing of the Sabotage Act, as it was called. They were looking for me, they were hunting for me, and they couldn't find me. So after a few weeks, they went to Eleanor's place of work, which was a bookshop down in West Street called Griggs.
Her parents' bookshop, eh?
Yeah. They arrested her there.
Sure.
And then they dragged her off to what they called was their Waarheidshuis, their house of truth. Grobler told her in Afrikaans as they got out of the car, "You tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, missus, and you got a life," he smirked. "Don't try and fool us and spare yourself trouble. If you don't give us the information we require, I guarantee I'll break you or hang you." The place was like a busy railway station in a war zone, with passengers' destinations appearing to be to hell and back. About a dozen male detainees, looking as if they'd been brought in from a battlefield, were slumped on wooden benches in a reception room. Some of them she recognized. As she was escorted through the building, she saw an old man being dragged down the stairs by a hulk of a policeman. Before she could recover from that shocking sight, a young friend of hers, Ibrahim Ismail, whom she had recently helped hide, was being hauled out of an office unconscious. Down another passageway, she came across another young man with whom she had been on many a protest demonstration, a handsome fellow called Sunny Singh, but his face was now swollen from beatings. He managed a brave grin as they passed her. The effort caused him to begin spitting blood. Before she knew it, she was shoved into a small office by Grobler with a crowd of yelling policemen swarming behind. They pressed in on her in the confined space, mean and angry. Her knees began to buckle as she tried to back away, only to find powerful arms propping her up from behind. She felt nauseous and vulnerable, with the blood throbbing through her temples and her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. It was as though she was drowning in a dark, heaving ocean. Though she could see them screaming and yelling, all she could hear was a roaring noise, and then shrill and wild above the din, Grobler's grating voice slapping into her with the force of a leather strap. I'll break you or hang you. And the book goes on. In this detention, under interrogation, she's got a huge amount of secrets that she's got to keep. She's terrified of breaking and betraying comrades, and she goes on a hunger strike, and they move her to Fort Napier, which was an asylum for the mentally ill outside Maritzburg, and they lock her up in the detention area, which is for the criminally insane.
Because she's criminally insane, she's not into apartheid.
And that's when she begins to plot her escape. And if anyone wants to know how she escaped, read the book.
We are talking about The Unlikely Secret Agent as well as The Virgin of Flames by Chris Abani. Both books deal with quite extraordinary characters. I want to change gears and come over to Chris and talk about spirituality, which is a very strong theme in this book. The idea of ritual, of inventing and reinventing what we know to be the self. In a way, biography does that, you know? You write about how you had to piece together these memories and ask friends and peers and your kids about these memories, but and in a way that's Black's story. That's the main character's story. So can you talk to us about that?
About Black?
Yeah, about Black.
The book is called The Virgin of Flames, and Black is a biracial Salvadoran Nigerian muralist whose secret desire is to be a woman. And this is so shocking to him that he can't face it, even though he's dating a transsexual stripper. And because Nigerians, we're good at denial. And so he blacks out, and when he blacks out, he dresses up as the Virgin Mary, and he appears all over East Los Angeles. And so, because it's such a Catholic community, they begin to treat him as a real apparition. Of course, it doesn't help that Black lives in a spaceship that he's built on top of someone's house. And so the Virgin ritually appears on top of the spaceship every...
And the whole community...
Yes, and his best friend is a former Rwandan Hutu militant who's gifted with the knife, and who comes to LA and opens a butcher shop.
A very successful butcher shop. He drives a Lexus.
Yes. And he's trying to help Black make sense of his life, and yes, and he's very inappropriate. This Rwandan, as many Africans are towards African Americans, and often wears T-shirts that are very insulting. His favorite is a T-shirt with a lynched man on it, and the slogan, "Just hanging." So it's a somewhat irreverent book, and in the middle of the book is a mural that Black has painted called, what's it called again? Something America, the Remix.
No, with all the curses and the,
so he's taken all of the racist jokes from toilets he's found, and all the sexist jokes, and he's put them together with poetry to make this mural, which he then paints. Oh, and then he paints a 50-foot-tall naked woman, and then dresses her up in a chadra so only her eyes are visible. And then the city council asks him to take her off, so he takes her off layer by layer, slowly stripping her. Until so it's just your regular happy read, you know. It's very autobiographical.
I want to talk to both of you about... I want to talk to both of you about memory. This incredibly feisty woman, born in apartheid South Africa, you know, kind of privileged for, you know, very privileged for the time. An ordinary woman who does extraordinary things with her life. And an extraordinary man, you know, Black is big and you know, kind of crazy looking, and there's a lot going on in his life. But underneath that, there's an ordinary human being who's experienced abuse, who's experienced pain, who's doing all these things to try to make sense of his life. So this relationship between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the two of you, you know, as these big guys in the world, you know, who've done extraordinary things, you know, but that are motivated by an ordinary pursuit of justice, of love, of humanity, you know? Can we vibe on that for a while?
I think you've actually said it. It's what you believe in. It's a cause that one serves. And I believe if it's a just cause, you're doing what's necessary, you find enormous courage. I don't want to sound like a political propagandist here, simply because I quote a political leader. But we used to discuss this in the guerrilla camps in Angola and quote Fidel Castro. And he used to say that the difference between a brave soldier and a coward is serving a just cause. Now, one could see this with somebody like Eleanor, who was a very slender woman, wasn't physically strong, but she found, as thousands of others of our people, countless thousands, who didn't believe that they could stand up against the police, didn't know they were that brave, that they had the courage to go on a hunger strike, face torture, survive, out with the police, whatever, face the dangers. And they were able to do so because of the belief they had in the justice of what they were doing, not for themselves, but for principle, for what we'd say is the truth, and so on. And that's the point of this book. And I would say, through writing this book, I found writing about women very interesting in the sense of that capacity and the empowerment that happens. Because men, like this ugly guy over there and this very handsome man here, both very big, whatever, people think we're the toughies. And actually, women have incredible depths of strength and courage, and she showed us. Because, you know, there were guys, including her commander, a guy that she had worked with in the underground who broke, and he sang like a canary. And they tried to turn her through that. And she, nevertheless, had the strength to face anything they threw at her.
That was one of the things that I found so interesting about the book is the places where you talk about how she keeps reminding herself that the system is abnormal, I'm not abnormal. The system is a terrorist, I'm not a terrorist,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
When all of the mirrors around you become so dysfunctional and so warped and so distorted that your own definition of normal is not normal. You have to keep reminding yourself what normal is. And at the same time, normal things are really abnormal. Like, there's a time when she comes out of jail and you guys are staying in that cottage and there's that floor, the trap door underneath. There's a trap door underneath, on the floor underneath the bed, ne? That leads down into the basement. So, young couple with a small child, like, they practice they clean out the basement, and they practice now and again how to climb into the basement just in case the police come, you know?
Well, it's not a basement, it's just a small cavity under the floorboards.
But you're two people falling in love, raising a child, doing something very normal in very abnormal circumstances.
We knew that the knock on the door would come.
Yeah.
This was the nature of the time. We talking about Human Rights Day. At that particular point in time, the government had passed draconian laws called the Sabotage Act, which meant that they could come, as they did with her, without a charge, and simply take her out of her place of work and lock her up without a charge, and indefinitely, and without access to anybody, no access to lawyers or whatever, and would say to her, until you tell us what we want to know, you know, you're here, and we'll throw away the key. So this was no rights for people. And that's what basically was happening in that period.
Chris, I'm going to come over to you. This relationship with black between the ordinary and the extraordinary. A little boy trying to make sense of his identity, dealing with huge, gross abuse, and a messed up mother and a father who's gone, and trying to find normal as an artist in an abnormal, dysfunctional city that sells itself to the whole world as glamorous. And in this book, you see a side of LA that you'll never see in the movies, that you'll never see on the E! Channel. Normal and black.
Show.
No, not till you get your reality show,
yeah.
which is coming.
Well, it's really interesting that Ronnie started off talking about a sort of women being the conduit or the access for him, because it's a very similar journey for me. The thing is, the history of all activism in Nigeria is the history of women, and in a lot of cases, it was usually illiterate market women who run the markets. The first real reaction to the British in 1922 was called the Abani Market Women's Riot. And they basically rioted against the British Army about a hike in the taxes. And they did something in Igbo culture, which is sort of the height of a curse. They stripped naked and sort of started raining curses on the soldiers.
That used to happen here too, huh? It's a big deal when mamas strip naked.
And then they opened yeah. Well, yeah. And
some of our young people actually pull their trousers down and show their backsides to their leaders. You know?
And so the police, the army opened, the army opened fire and killed a lot of them. But my mother was my conduit to activism, because she was one of those. She was English, which already makes her eccentric.
I thought all English were eccentric.
No, just some of them.
Yeah.
She was 5'2", which already gave her a complex. And she.
Short people have complexes. What's up?
Not you. Talking about you.
Not you. She was an incredible human being, and one of the earliest things. My mother had converted from the Church of England to Catholicism when she married my father. Yeah. And converts are terrible because they just take things too far.
They
love it. So she joined Opus Dei and then suddenly got into a big letter writing fight with the Pope over birth control. Because we were living in a very rural part of a small village called Afikpo where there was no birth control, and most of the people were Catholic, and so they weren't allowed. And so all these women were having way too many children, more than they could take care of. And so my mother decided that she would find a way that would allow her to be Catholic and sort of stick her tongue out at the Pope. So she started teaching something called the Billings ovulation method, which was a series of withdrawals and monitoring your period and telling when you were ovulating. But as much as my mother tried, you know, period and ovulation were words in Igbo she couldn't figure out. So when she would go to talk to these women, she would take me to translate, which makes sense. And so I'm 8 years old.
Talk about a feminist, eh?
Talking to women in their 30s whose husbands didn't know what their period was like.
Wow.
Trying to ask them about their flow and how heavy and how often, and then trying to transfer this knowledge to them, because part of it had to do with monitoring your vagina. And so I'd have to ask them questions like, usually during your period, how large does your vulva swell? And so
normal.
Very normal.
Normal.
And so it was fantastic, because I didn't know what the hell was going on. I didn't know what a vulva was. I thought for a long time I was calling it Volvo, which was part of the which sort of explains my early awkward teenage sexual experiences. I kept expecting to find a car, but anyway. But it was
get a Volvo, you get a Volvo.
But it's sort of this way in which there was not a fanfare about it, right? There was no trumpets being blown.
Yeah.
Something needed to be done, and she just went and did it.
And she did it the best way she knew how.
Well, and also, if my mother's one of those, she was born just during the Second World War, so if you called her a feminist, she would get into a fight with you.
Wow.
Right? So for her, taking me was simply, I was the youngest boy, so I was at home. And having come back to Nigeria as young as I did, I spoke the most fluent Igbo, right? And my sister was too young, so for her there wasn't. They asked her years later about that stuff, and she said, "You turned out all right, didn't you?" You know, so it's really incredible in these ways in which in most of the African contexts, it is women who lead the revolution. Men turn up for the photo op.
Eish. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I want to talk about memory and worship. Ritual plays such a big part in this book. Black is very ritualistic. He's ritualistic in his performance. He's ritualistic in the way that he goes to, you know, see the stripper. What's her name?
Sweet girl.
Sweet girl. Sweet girl. He's, you know, his fixation with Sweet girl. The thing he wears around his neck with his baby, with his childhood picture, and ritual as a memory, as an act of ritual, as an act of worship. I mean, this is probably, it's the ultimate love letter that any man could write for any woman. It's a painstaking depiction of your love for her through her life, you know, through her own life. So I'd like the both of you to talk about memory and love as worship and as memory. To kind of take worship out of this religious whole, you know, take it out of that context, you know, but how we build ourselves up and how we build love up through these repetitive acts of remembering.
But I mean, religion is also part of that, but not I guess not so much in the notion of an organized religion.
Yes,
but I think that religion is an actual language, and it's a language that's really important to human beings, and how that gets worked out is through ritual, which is why even the Catholic liturgy is always about, you know, here is my blood, here is my body, do this in memory of me. So that in a way, ritual is a kind of mnemonic device that we use to remember, and it is always closely linked to the body, right? Because the body is the only thing anyone at a certain point starts to feel that they own. And some of the biggest challenges, in fact, almost all the characters in my books are people whose bodies don't belong to them. They have to fight to get their bodies back. Abigail is about a young girl who's trafficked into slavery, sexual slavery, but she's born just as her mother dies in childbirth. They have the same name, they look the same, and everyone confuses her for her mother, including her father. And she spends a lot of her early childhood burning stories about her mother onto her skin. So it's always about how you reclaim the body through ritual, and this book is full of it. There's a Jewish Indian fakir who's she's sort of a psychic. And
with the tattoos.
Yeah, she has a shop called the Ugly Shop. And
The Ugly Shop is fantastic.
She hangs herself upside down by meat hooks. And you lie in the tattoo chair, and as she tattoos you, she starts to read
on like Paris Hilton, you know, on Paris Hilton's back. Sure.
And there's a whole queue of all the Hollywood stars trying to get in. But the trick is to get into the Ugly Store. You have to have a physical disability. So in the book, Paris Hilton's in the line trying to scratch a line into her face, and they won't let her in. But so for me, I was raised very Catholic, and was sent to seminary to be a priest and got kicked out. We shan't say why. But it's sort of the whole way in which memory is tracked in this way through ritual. And I was saying my mother was very English. She was this English that we were living in Nigeria in a small village, and I would go running around playing, and then at 4 o'clock the tea bell would sound, and I'd have to sit on the veranda, drinking tea, eating cucumber sandwiches with their crust cut off, listening to Glenn Miller, while my friends sat on the lawn like making fun of me. Because in a way for her, this was ritual of home. This was ritual of place. So everything that is important to us is marked by ritual, and I think that's essentially, if you really look at the roots of language, it's really a way to articulate ritual, and it's a way to continue memory. And so all my work is against forgetting. Everything I write is against forgetting. And it often means I go into dark places that can be disruptive, but they always lead into, and there's always a perverse sense of humor in them, which I really like. So anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. That's very generous of you. That's very generous of you. Thank you. Maybe before we open up to the audience, I'd like to build on the same question and talk to you about what happens to a country that loses its memory. You know, I think we're in a situation in South Africa right now where we see a lot of erasure, you know, a lot of erasure of history, erasure of language, erasure of land, erasure of all sorts of things. So when we lose this ability to worship painstakingly, to refashion who we are, you know, what happens? What do you see?
Well, I listened so carefully to my brother here, and of course I'm not religious, and symbols for me were very different, and for Eleanor, they happen to be the political symbols. So when she's on her own in detention, to gain courage, she sings the freedom songs. And when you're many together and you sing those songs,
powerful.
You know, you get very, very courageous and strong. When you're on your own and you don't sing too well, neither she or I did or do, but she just thought about it and she sang as though she was with other women.
Yeah.
And that gave her strength, like political slogans and your flag and so on. In the days of underground, you couldn't show these things openly. So a lot of it's actually in your head. And Milan Kundera, the Czech writer, had said that the struggle against power, the struggle against tyranny, is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And that's why it's so important for a people to know their culture and their traditions, as it is with the religious people to know their religion and their prayers and so on. So this is very important, the past and what has happened, and to remember that. But of course, it's about the now and it's about the future. And if I can just connect today with what you're talking about, because I don't quite agree with everything you've said, I mean, we are facing problems, but it's not as though everything's being
No,
erased.
no,
Okay,
it's not that, it's not that.
Okay, sure. But we don't want to fight in front of everybody here.
No,
do
we'll
we?
save it for later.
So it is so important a day like this for us to remember what those values were, and values in all senses, from the religious to the non-religious and the political and the personal, etc., and our morality and our ethics, what that integrity and honesty was about in our struggle, because the people who sacrificed were not involved in the struggle for gain, for power, for privilege, for money. Like a lot of kids ask us today when we speak, whether it was in the schools the other day or around the country, well, what did you want to get out of it? When we talk about the past, we say we weren't doing this for anything other than fighting for justice. So this is what we must remember. And whatever our God is, whatever we worship, etc., it must be humanity, a human factor. And to recall those values and not lose those values. And it's the struggle for those values. And this is the struggle today on human rights day to day, and the struggle as we go forward.
What I see a lot of is a co-opting of the vocabulary, the language that is about the values that you're talking about, but it's not backed up by the actual values, you know? It's a different thing when you are genuinely struggling for something and you don't know what the outcome is. And then you achieve this miraculous thing, you know, and it becomes like a blank slate. It's another thing when 16 years on or 18 years on, you know that language and you know how to play on those emotions, but you also know that there's a tender at the end of it. You know that there's that there are tangible things that you can get out of it. Or even on the other end of the spectrum, you know that you have the ability to manipulate a particular media, you know, a particular form of media to get people to think a certain way. That's I didn't mean to erase, you know, the contribution that you and that many others have made. That wasn't it. But the importance of remembering, of going back, of reclaiming, of holidays like this is very ritualistic. It's a ritual that all of us as a nation are participating in.
Well, it must be more than ritual, because ritual is a type of automatic thing that sometimes you just repeat and repeat, like the Hail Marys and so on. It's got to be very deep.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to know and understand.
It's got to
so
be
the
backed up.
education's so important, etc. But you see, it might sound strange, because when you're having a life and death struggle for freedom against dictatorship, despotism, it's life and death. And what can be more dangerous and challenging than that? But the difference of that sort of period and now when you're in the kingdom of freedom is that those involved in the struggle previously had to put their heads on the line, their heads on the block. And, you know, yes, people could be broken and could become traitors, but generally you were there and involved, not for yourself, but for this greater good. You get then to freedom, the political kingdom, as Nkrumah talked about it. And now, can you be sure that whoever is saying, please vote for me, I want to help you, I want to be your servant, that I want your votes in order to put money in my pocket. So this is the key thing. It actually becomes more complex and difficult, and you can have demagogues arising to get the support of the people. I don't want to go too long
much
on
into
this,
that, yeah,
but
yeah.
I've got the most important anecdote for me. Comes from a great African called Lucio Lara, who's at the end of his life now in Angola. He's not terribly well. He was the right-hand man of Agostinho Neto, who was Angola's leader of their struggle and their first president, and died in about 1980 or so. And we know what's happened to Angola since, with all the oil wealth, etc., the type of corruption and so on. It's become really bad. People are just feathering their own nests. And he wrote about this, and he actually pinpointed when the change took place. And he said, you know, we used to be driven by the maxim of Agostinho Neto, who used to say, everything
pay respect to all the people that were involved in the struggle for liberation in this country, in particular the non-black activists or revolutionaries. The Pram Fishers, the Ronnie Kasrils, the Ruth First, to name a few, people who really chose to be black when it was highly unfashionable to do so. Moving on, my question to Ronnie. The post-94 dispensation, in my view, has failed dismally to transform the country. Race continues to be by far the greatest determinant of the quality of life that you lead, of your life chances, of where you live and who you socialize with. Just want to get his views. And for me, the failure to integrate economically is one of the greatest threats to our very young, seemingly fragile democracy. What went wrong and what are the prospects moving forward? Thank you.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah, let's do one at a time. It's okay. It's fine.
You're taking one at a time. Thanks very much. Extremely pertinent question. Certainly, there's a long way still to go. I've quoted Nkrumah, who said first the political kingdom and then the economic kingdom. I think it's a bit dangerous to put them in the silos, and in a sense, we always said here that it would be integrated, and we didn't see the political and then the economic as the first and then the second. But we were faced with quite a challenge, which a great South African, Nelson Mandela, helped us to understand, because there were lots of us who didn't want that compromise of 1994 with the sunset clause, with the reconciliation at that particular time, or rather compromise of the time. But I think that Mandela was right in the sense that we couldn't go for civil war in this country, and the idea of driving on with the revolution in terms of arms, which a lot of us militants and those of MK wanted, would have really cost this country dear, because we weren't strong enough to overthrow very powerful white rule, this white apartheid state in this country. And de Klerk understood that and realized that he needed to save the economy and the wealth they had by coming to a very radical, and for him, a very courageous decision to give up power, which is what they did, political power. We were very optimistic that from there we would be able to drive through the changes of the Freedom Charter. We have achieved considerable things, and I think a lot of our people realize that and understand it. But at the same time, we also hear the murmurs and the demonstrations and the protests. And where we've really gone wrong is, as in the Angolan example, where leaders came to the fore. I was one of the leaders in cabinet, etc., but where we tended to find that so many of our people in leadership positions all over the country placed self-interests first. And the fact that the delivery process, which was going very well, water, services, electricity, housing, etc., has started grounding to something of a problem, lies in that. What happens to the tenders, what happens to the capital that's put there, and so on, and which makes people very, very angry. So the biggest danger we face, as the Angolans and elsewhere has faced, not only in Africa, around the world, and that is the poison of corruption, and the corruption of the elite, and the corruption of leadership, and of organization. So I believe that there is an area of struggle. There are many sites of struggle. Civil society is very important to build civil society and civil society's voice, but also within the ruling party, within the liberation movement, because there are very good patriots there who don't like what's happening and need to be reminded. So those of us who raise our voices need to do so as the conscience of this ANC and the Liberation Alliance. And I think the head of COSATU, the Secretary General, Zwelinzima Vavi, is a great leader in that respect. So I'm not feeling pessimistic on this Human Rights Day. I think we've got to understand what the problems are. We can't bemoan the compromise of Mandela. It was Mandela's compromise. We've got to find the way forward now in order to solve the problems of our people and all our people.
I wanna come over to Chris because I know this is something, please. Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. I want to come over to you about, this is your 4th time of the writer, you've been back to South Africa, you've come to South Africa many times, you've written about South Africa. Where are you at with all of this?
Well, as the next president of South Africa, you know, because that's how Nigerians roll.
Because Nigerians are taking over.
You know, it's really interesting because this is a continental problem. You know, often the problem with Africa is the middle classes, right? Because all over Africa, the middle classes want to live with all the trappings of a Western middle class: Starbucks, nice cars, air conditioning, without essentially the economic infrastructure that holds up such a system. And I think it's particularly the difficulty in the South African struggle, which is slightly different if you're looking at a country like Nigeria where it's actually everyone is black. From the beginning, your oppressors look like you. So the struggle, the struggle becomes very clearly either an ethnic issue or more predominantly a class issue. Now, in a country like this where the struggle was a racialized struggle, right? There is a way in which black leadership had to push a socialist agenda that they couldn't deliver in a capitalist system. But also where when you galvanize everyone around a racial question, it becomes difficult then for all the blacks involved to understand that there were already black middle-class people. There were parts of Soweto at the time called Beverly Hills.
Yeah, Pimville, Deep Kloof Extension.
So that there was already within the struggle a black middle class.
Yeah.
And so, but the lie of the deliverance was that we would all be delivered into the same class. And of course, that's the hardest part of the betrayal, because what happens is the middle class will always protect itself. Class is about money and power, and money and power has nothing to do with race. It has to do with sustaining money and power and institution. And this is really what the problem is. And so I completely agree that because, you know, there's something really remarkable. You know, it's something when you're in South Africa and you are a South African and you are struggling with these things, there is a sense of isolation, because like America, South Africa for a long time was an island, right? The notion that you were connected to an outside world, that there were people like you, that looked like you, who desperately wanted your freedom. That I was 10 years old when Sharpeville happened, and that there was a day of mourning in my house, all right? So that these things happen, so that there is a whole continent of people looking to that moment of the transition, where there was an attempt to look for, as flawed as it was, a peaceful solution, where essentially people chose an ethical stance over an easy moral political stance. This is the TRC, as flawed as it was, as flawed as it will always be, is a shining example to the whole world, because America has still not apologized for what it's done to African Americans. It hasn't apologized fully to the Japanese. West Africa has not apologized to African Americans for our involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. So here is South Africa, who has no reason to do this, who do this. So it's important to understand what it means for the future of an entire continent, if we really want to believe in the African Union, that South Africa not go down this road of violence, because it never solves anything. And I tell you this much, hate has little to do with anything but sustaining itself. So even if you were to go out and there was a civil war and you try to kill all the Boers and they die, then the Zulu will turn on someone else. Just like in Nigeria, it was Hausa versus Igbo. In fact, to me, in Nigeria, the only ethnic group that seems to really understand how to live peacefully are the Yoruba. They've never been involved in any war. You will find a Yoruba household where the mother is a Christian, the father is a Muslim, and children choose a religion. There's no religious conflict. That kind of evolved sense of being is what South Africa offers. How you work it out from now on is really what Ronnie is saying, is the idea now that we no longer have the pretense that those promises that were made to us pre-struggle can be delivered the way they were made. The question now is, how do we begin to hold our leaders accountable and to force them, and not to let a leader who is corrupt use a slogan of hate to deflect us. Look, I grew up under military dictatorships. Babangida, we used to call him Maradona, the football player. Because I remember one time the Armed Forces Ruling Council that he was in charge of were facing increased pressure about human rights abuse from Nigerians. And he came on national television and diverted the whole conversation by making a simple robber, a bandit, Anini, making him the focus of the entire country. And so everyone now diverts their hatred. So when you have people talking, what's his name, our gifted friend who has $500 million. And,
Julius Malema.
Right. And so, you know, Mr. Julius uses the slogans of hatred to make money for himself. Yeah. Right? And then we get confused by it. So I think we really need to step back and analyze what's going on and figure out a way to take our money back.
Yes. Yes.
Vote for me.
I see. How much time do we have? Actually, it's now 8. One more time. I've got 20 to 9. What time do we have to break now? Timekeeper, hey? We've got until 9:30. Hey? The discussion goes up to 9:30.
Okay, so we have some time.
Oh, we've got time. And to the poetry performance. What time are we?
Why are they looking at the time? What?
Okay, can somebody write it for me and pass it to me? There's a question. I see a lady there with the black top, other center middle, lower center middle. I see another lady, a gentleman there at the top with the blue T-shirt. I see the lady with the white T-shirt. 1, 2, 3.
Lebo, you're not easy.
I think you guys will be round 3, ne? This section here, you are round 3 here, generally. Don't raise your hands, anyone here.
Hi, this is a question for Chris, although please, Mr. Kasrils, you're also welcome to. Speaking of another human right that I believe has not been actualized is women's rights. You had mentioned that at the forefront of a lot of the revolutionary sort of actions, political actions in Nigeria were illiterate market women. And I think your work addresses gender issues a lot. There's such a lack of, if we're just talking about the literary and the book world, seems like there's such a lack of women and women's worldview and their perspectives, their liberation in terms of production, articulation, distribution, etc. And in terms of day-to-day realities of ordinary working women, just multiple levels of oppression that just goes on throughout the day, every day. And I wanted to ask you, it's a very, very broad, it's such a broad topic, and I don't have a specific question, but if you could speak on that. And I suppose, sorry, I'm forgetting what else I wanted to add, but yeah.
So you're asking a man his plan for women's liberation, eh? Okay. No, I think you touch on a really difficult subject, because part of the difficulty with patriarchy, which is power, is that even when patriarchy mea culpas, it still doesn't surrender power. And so it's not even enough to nod towards the problem. And again, in this beautiful subterfuge way that systems have of maintaining themselves, there actually is quite a lot of discourse and articulation about women's rights. What there isn't is a practice of it, right? There are still, even in the United States, situations where pay is not equal, access to careers are not equal, access to medical care is not equal. So I think that part of the problem you often find is that in government there are not enough women, which is quite surprising about Nigeria, given a lot of the bad reputation we have been given mistakenly has always had women in powerful positions who not only enact, I mean, a lot of our economic policy is decided by, and has been decided in really good ways by Ngozi Iweala. So consistently, even when I was a child, there were female commissioners of police, there were female public sector, and that led to a lot of equality. But there are still these situations where the way gender works in the West is not the way gender works on the continent. That there are ways in which gender is negotiated in Africa between men and women that is so old, centuries old, that if I were to pretend to know a way to solve it, I would actually sell it for a lot of money. But I think that part of the hardest thing to hear about this, and I'm going to say it and hopefully not die, is that women themselves have to hold themselves culpable for the roles they play in maintaining the status quo. And as I give you a very simple situation, circumcision used to be practiced in my small town. And when it was my sister's turn, my mother wouldn't allow this to happen. And all my aunts were up in arms. And they insisted, and she said no, and I watched my cousins be circumcised, this is not happening in the 1920s. This is happening in 1976, 1977. And it's died down now, but the people who were still pushing to hold on to that were the women. Now, this is part of a general problem when you start to talk about how a person moves from years of systemized trauma into a place of liberation. Because freedom is quite a scary thing. And sometimes historical trauma itself is what holds us back from that. So that's one side of it. But also I think that it's time for the men in Africa to become men. Because I don't think they're men, I think they're boys. A lot of them are boys.
Hallelujah.
There's a lot of growing up that needs to happen. And I think that is the job of other men, to call other men out. There are ways in which men unconsciously, even when it makes them uncomfortable. You know how it's like you could walk into, like, you know, the big joke in LA was that, you know, George Bush hated black men, but if I walked into a bar and sat next to him and turned to him and went, fucking women, right? We'd be instant friends.
Right,
so
right.
There are ways in which men who don't necessarily agree with sexism find themselves colluding with it also. And so I think you just need to start calling them out, because that's what worked really well in my small town. People just called people out all the time. And that's one of the ways forward. But other than that, I don't know. If I had, this is the great thing about being a writer. You know, people ask you for your opinion, but you don't have any power. And so it's all, after a while, it just becomes words. And so I don't know. This is the best I can do, and I don't know if that helps at all.
Brother right at the top with the blue top, yes, and then followed by the lady with the white t-shirt, please. Thank you, honey. 5 minutes till interval. I do. You know how I roll.
Thank you very much. Like, to give me this opportunity. I'm so excited about it. Yes. My question is going to be directed to you, Lebo. You know, please. Because, like, one of the people actually always inspiring me.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms like these poetry sessions or whatever. So what I would like to know is, actually I have 2 questions. My first question is,
There's 2 questions. Colin says, do you want to marry me?
Okay.
Shakara!
Brother, ask your questions. Do.
The first one is, why actually did you go for doing like poem? You know, what actually has been like inspiring you?
Why did I decide to write poetry?
Yes, yeah,
okay.
That's the first question. Yes, and the second one is, what actually are you doing in terms of like to make sure that?
In terms of?
In terms of like making sure that those people who are like behind, who are like young, want just to get there, to be there where you are right now.
Yo, okay.
Yes.
What am I doing to help people become better poets?
Thank you.
Hopefully, I started writing poetry because I think poetry chose me. I fell in love with literature at a very early age. In my teens and in my early 20s, poetry was the medium that struck me the most because it was accessible, because it was immediate, because there were very few barriers between me and the audience that wanted to hear my work. And I fell in love with the fact that it lent itself to so many different mediums. It lived on stage, it lived on the page. I could take it and fuse it. You can take it and fuse it with so many different other art forms. I found that very exciting and still find it very exciting. A lot of young people ask me, you know, how do I get there, you know? And first of all, where? Exactly. Thank you. Where's there? Where's there? You know, I'm still trying to figure out how to get there, you know? From month to month, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. I know that I have to pay bills, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. Being an artist is a full-time working artist is the ultimate freestyle. It is, and it's the only thing that I've ever done, you know? I do 50 million things to earn a living. I have an ability with language, and I have an ability to talk and connect to people, and I do that in all kinds of different spaces to try to earn a living, you know? And I see myself as a student of my craft, you know? I submit to my craft. That is my religion. So if you want to take any of that from me, the best place to look for it is in the work itself, you know? That's the best thing that I've got to offer you. And the best advice that I could give you is also to look for it in the works of many other fantastic, talented, generous, intellectually generous writers. Beyond that, Papa, there's no formula. Consistency, excellence, and submission and discipline. And on that happy note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to respectfully ask you from the bottom of my heart to give it up for these two fabulous men. I think it must be noted, I mean, it was quite powerful for me that we ended on not your question, brother. And I'm sorry for you. Askis, time out. I apologize. Had no hard feelings. It wasn't personal. I'm sorry. It was quite powerful for me that, you know, the big question that we ended on was this gender question, and I'm sitting here with these two amazing men who both have chosen to write about women, you know? So that in and of itself needs to be affirmed. There's a lot of dodgy guys out there, but we happen to be sitting with two great ones, and you had the opportunity to hear them. Thank you so much. Enjoy the interval, 15 minutes, and come back.